Shalom. Welcome to our Erev Shabbat talk here in Eretz Israel. I'm Avraham Shira, and we have a very interesting subject today that I think is really at the heart of human issue and discourse, and certainly in our generation, maybe, perhaps more than any generation, at least in recent times. This idea of the feminized male, Shabbat and the feminized male, and I call it the restoration in the garden, because everything that happened in the garden was a setup for the future, not only for the human players in the story, but for God himself. Because the setup in the garden was to create free choice, to give the human entity, the human being, the human race, the ability to exercise and actualize this divine gift called free choice. And if there's no dichotomy of choices, then there's no free choice. So there had to be a garden, there had to be a fall, and there had to be, all these things are very deep. But for us today, what does this mean? What does it have to do with the feminized male? And what does that have to do with the idea of redemption from exile? Because we know the Jewish people have been in exile for 2,000 years, and we know the Torah was in exile with the Jewish people, and we know the land was empty and barren and desolate, which was also an aspect of exile from its own power, and the exile of the sages, and the exile of our identity, the exile of our sovereignty, the exile of our power. All of those things took place over the last 2,000 years, and redemption is about getting those things back in a proper way, in a rectified way. To be after power is not enough, but to be after a relationship with the balance of power, with the Creator as the true power, then we're on the way to rectification and repair and what we call the tikkun olam. Now, so let's ask a question. Where was Adam? And this is not a new question, but it's something we got to kind of go back to and think about more than once. It's very deep. Where was Adam when the primordial snake, that beautiful two-legged creature, approached in the hyperlight, bodiless world? Remember, they were not physical beings at the time. They were souls without bodies. I'm a soul in a body right now, talking to you, a soul in a body. But if you remove the body, you still have you and you still have me. Now, that's where they were in the beginning, before the fall. And here comes this charming, clever, intelligent, well-spoken fellow into the garden and to seduce, to provide Chava with a choice that she was not really prepared to make. At least according to what we would hope would be the proper choice, get out of here, buddy. I don't even know who you are. What are you doing in my house? And what do you do? What are you offering me? What are you trying to sell me? But that didn't happen. The question is, where was Adam? Adam was commanded to guard the garden and to work in the garden. Now, I would hope certainly, and I would think most of you would agree, that when God commanded Adam to guard and to work the garden, he meant also to guard his wife. But he wasn't there. Where he was, well, that's a real hard question. I don't have the midrashim on that answer. He could have been off working. He could have been, checking his iPhone. But he wasn't there where Chava needed him to be. And so he was not able to protect her. She was not able to have anybody running interference for her. And so she was, shall we say, vulnerable to the stranger in that such setup. Another question I had was, why didn't Adam immediately get upset with the snake and go after him? The guy invaded your home. He did things to his wife. The Zohar says very, very deep things that are hard to even repeat. But let's just say that the sin wasn't just simply partaking of an apple. Okay, we know that. It was partaking of self, of soul, of taking control of somebody else's soul was really what the snake was about. And there are ways that people or beings do that and the way people do that. But why didn't Adam attack? Why didn't he go on the rampage? Why didn't he go looking for the guy? Hunt him down? So to me, that's another question that I guess you could easily answer it and say, well, have you ever tried to fight an angel? Have you ever tried to fight a being that doesn't die, that keeps coming back for more? Like in, I guess the Matrix movies, they had that happening all the time. Keeps coming back for more. Like, wow, give me a break. How about round 3, round 4? No breaks. It's constant attack from the other side. That's part of why it's so maddening, this relationship we have to evil. However, we have the Torah and we have the tools and we have the guidance if we want it for that battle, for that life battle. However, we forgot one thing here in our equation. When Chava was approached by this snake, Shabbos was coming in. Transformation was happening. And and we all know when you go from one being to another, when you go from your youthful self to your more mature self, when you go from your mature self to your complete self, anytime you have a transition in life, it's a moment of challenge. And moving, for example, just changing apartments or houses is a big challenge. Certainly changing your spouse, huge challenge. Changing a job, another big challenge. Any of these types of transitions are difficult, and there are times when people are vulnerable emotionally, psychologically, and even sometimes physically. So they were in a transition from the weekday till Shabbat. They were created on Erev Shabbat, on Friday, and here comes Shabbat. They don't know exactly what Shabbat is, but what we know is that Shabbat is a time when we don't do things. The Shabbat is a time when we only receive. And see, in Kabbalah, we understand that there's this idea of giving and receiving. And the giving is the masculine mode of being, and receiving is the feminine mode of being. And we know that every human being is made of both. Every human being has a male side and a female side. And they're both meant to be exercised at different times in our life, and different moments in our day, for that matter. And so that the giving side of us is the male side. That's I need to go out and work, and I need to bring home money, and I need to take care of my business. And that first and foremost means my wife and my family. And a woman's, the feminine side, I shouldn't say a woman, because the feminine side is that, okay, I need to do things, and I need help to doing them, and I need stuff. I need money to shop. I need money to create the environment that we're hoping to create. So the feminine energy is that energy of receiving in order to create. A woman needs to receive in order to create a child. And so on and so forth. That's the feminine power. And so Shabbat is the time where the whole world becomes feminine. I should repeat that, right? Shabbat is the time that the whole world becomes feminine, because it's the time where God says, stop. I'm going to give to you now what you worked for all week. I'm going to give you peace. I'm going to give you pleasantness. I'm going to give you a time without, having a mini computer attached to your brain. I'm going to give you a time where you don't have to deal with the outside world. I'm going to give you a time where you get to be boss of your own life for those 25 hours of Shabbat. And that is the idea of receiving from Hashem. And that's what we want to do, is receive Shabbat. We call it Kabbalat Shabbat. And it's not far away here in Eretz Israel. And so male and female energy is turned into female energy at a certain level. However, it's not enough just to say, okay, I don't have to do anything. Now I'm just going to receive. Honey, bring dinner. Honey, bring the wine. Honey, how about my slippers and my jacket? It ain't so, right? There's no end to it. But that's really, we understand that's a little exaggerated, but the idea of receiving is not just to receive because it's pleasurable to me, because that's selfish. And that's not the goal of Shabbat, and that's certainly not the goal of God's creating this world, is that we can perpetuate selfishness, right? Our goal is to do the opposite, to create and perpetuate charity, giving, and helping. Okay. So we have this time during the week where we're working, we're giving, we're being more masculine, energy oriented by giving. And then on Shabbat, we have this time where we're going to be more receiving, more feminine energy as passing between the heaven and earth, between man and his fellow man as well. Because when you have people, by the way, when you have people over on Shabbat at your table, you're doing like, I don't know how many mitzvot, I didn't count them all at once, but you're doing hachnasat orchim, which is what the whole religion of Judaism is based on, Abraham's tent, opening up a tent for people, travelers to come in, sit down, take a load off Mary, take a load off your feet and off your back, and you get off that camel, they're not that fun to ride around in. And get a good word and a good meal. And that's how Abraham built this religion. And that's what Shabbat is, having people over for a meal and to give to them. So you're doing charity, you're doing hachnasat orchim, you're spreading the good word, you're sharing from every aspect of your life on Shabbat. So that's all about making other people, helping other people receive. But what does it mean this phrase, to rectify receiving? To turn my receiving from something that I get pleasure into, I'm receiving Shabbat, and what pleasure am I giving if I don't have guests over, etc., etc.? Well, actually, I'm giving God pleasure. And that's where man becomes most God-like. Because when I keep Shabbat and I receive Shabbat, and when you do it, and every person, what happens? We fulfill God's creation of us, because He created the whole world in order that He could give to something that could recognize the giving and the generosity and the selflessness that God created this world with. So that's really what we call the rectification, the tikkun of receiving, is when I understand that my receiving, your receiving, is actually even greater than giving, because you're fulfilling the other person's need to give. And in this case, you're fulfilling the Creator's need to create and give to you. And so that fulfilling God's desire to give fulfills, well, all of creation, and we're part of that. So there is a place where your receiving is not selfish. When you go over to somebody's house on Shabbat and eat a meal, and they really want you to be there and be their guest, and you're enjoying the meal, and you're thanking God for that and thanking them, you're fulfilling their need. And so your receiving is giving. And Rabbi Nachman says this is the highest giving. That when you actually enable another person to give, and you're not receiving it for yourself at all, you're receiving it for the other person on Shabbat. And we're doing that in the big picture for Hashem Himself. And so keeping Shabbat is considered, is like, it's so interesting because in the beginning, keeping Shabbat seems like difficult. You have to give up so much. and at this point, 30 years later, keeping Shabbat is like the thing I look forward to most every week. Because it's a break. It's a time to take our relationship with God in a different level altogether. That we can give back to God what He so selflessly gave to us. And so both sides are fulfilled in the equation. And that happens at the divine level and also at the everyday level between human beings. That when we learn to receive from the other person order because they want to give or they need to give. Sometimes people don't want to give and you enable them to give anyways, and it actually elevates them. They become happier. And that's That's what they tell you when you go out and collecting for the yeshiva. No, you're doing them a favor by giving them a chance to give to you or to the yeshiva. It's true. It's just such a switch in the normal way of things that we have to get used to it and understand that there is truth in that. However, for this Shabbat, and hopefully many, many Shabbatot after, let's remember that the feminizing of the male is part of the perfection of the male energy, and that every man needs to fix his feminine side, every woman needs to fix her masculine side, and that Shabbat is a perfect opportunity to be able to practice that rectified receiving, that tikkun olam, of that humanity should actually get into the place to properly receive the presence of Hashem, the presence of the Shekhinah in this world again, in a revealed way. And then you'll see that humanity really is going to make a quantum leap in our own elevation and the evolution of the entire species and the whole world. So there's a lot to look forward to. Next week, we look forward to continuing our work with Rabbi Nachman on Patreon and those classes. And we have many new writings coming out and essays and talks and little trips around Jerusalem and around Israel. So life is filled with goodness, and I should invite you to share that and have a wonderful Shabbat.